thank you all for coming out to see what some of us do just to have fun. But anyway, I'm going to, we're talking about Nantucketers and their boats. I can really only tell you about a very few, and me in particular, so it's going to be autobiographical about this Nantucketer and his boat. And the story starts with Nantucket, which is really in a special place. And Nantucket's not only surrounded by the water, but it's really the, how do you say, it's the outpost, it's the outer marker for anybody going to the Maritimes, to Europe, to the Mediterranean, or even, you know, if you're going to the Pacific or the Far East, you go to by the Azores first and on around. And you'll notice when Nantucket got started, its competition was Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. And by sailboat, we're a couple of days closer to where everybody's trying to go. So Nantucket's very well situated. It's also surrounded by the ocean and in all their variety. I mean, we have the open ocean on the south shore. We have the inlets that come from the ocean and go into the Sound, which is this wonderful semi-protected body of water that we sail on. Nantucket is blessed with wind, and it's challenged by fog and shoal and currents. So it's a really good training ground for anybody trying to sail. I mean, you want to sail because you're right in the middle of all this stuff. And it's more important to just being seaside to be a sailing place. It's really important to have a harbor. And every voyage starts in a harbor, it crosses a body of water, and then it ends in a harbor. And good harbors are rare, they're valuable, and Nantucket has one. And it wasn't always this way. And when people first came to Nantucket, they used Capwan Pond on the North Shore for their harbor. And I surmise that Capwan Pond back then was similar to Tuckernuck's East Pond, which really is just usable for boats. I mean, you can drag something that draws 2 feet of water in there, but that's about all you can do. So the Nantucketers were ambitious, and in the early 18th century, they moved over to the Great Harbor, and they built this system of wharves, which were built very quickly, and they were built before the town was built. They started using these wharves, and town moved over to service them. They actually moved a lot of the buildings, built a lot of new buildings. And from here, they started traveling around the world, developing their whaling industry, and discovering great swaths of the Pacific. And as an example is Captain Worth, who's one of David's ancestors here, who sailed 2 million miles out of Nantucket, 15 roundings of Cape Horn, 2 circumnavigations, and basically spent 40 years living on a whale ship in and out of Nantucket and around the world. A lot of those he and a lot of his colleagues, trips are memorialized on the walls of this building. So there's Nantucket and its sound, and Nantucket asked to be a cruising ground because look at all the little nooks and crannies and places to go. Up Harbour, the West End, over to Martha's Vineyard. There are all these routes through it. So this is the Nantucket Harbor that I grew up on in 1956. You see, it's mostly sailboats, just one motorboat like the one I owned later. You look out in anchorage out here, and most of the boats have two masts. You fast forward to today, it's a little bit different scene. All the sailboats have disappeared, except for the Indian here, which may have been in the previous picture. And even in the 1950s, the last day of sailboats were being forewarned. Here's the Lively Lady, one of the catboats that used to take tourists out sailing, and like the boats that caught codfish and went scalloping and carried cargo and so forth all around Nantucket Sound for a couple hundred years. So I learned sailing from my father, Teeny Sanford, and he was a man that he loved sailing. He knew a lot about sailboats, their design and construction. His first boat that I knew about was the Vineyard Sound Inner Club. Now, I never actually saw this boat, but I remember him making a model of it in his workshop when I was a little kid. And then in the early 50s in Nantucket, it was long after he'd sold it, it was sailing around Nantucket Harbor with an old gentleman in it named Alfie Chandler. And he was my nicknamesake. So I paid a lot of attention to it and got to know the riptide pretty well. But my father was a great fan of Alpha Fox. And Alpha Fox introduced the planing dinghy to the world. And at this time, in the mid-50s, when I'm starting to learn how to sail and what it's all about, two big things are happening in sailing. One is fiberglass is being discovered, and two, planing dinghies are taking over the world. And Alpha Fox is behind these, and my father sort of led the way here in Nantucket. Here he is sailing his international 12-footer, which may be the boat that was a drawing of, that I just showed you. That's a boat that I went sailing in when I was 2 years old. I do not remember it, to correct James, but I was there. Later, he got a Thistle, which is a Douglas and McLeod boat, actually designed out in the Midwest. But as you can see, she's a 17-foot version of that same boat. And they used to put me down here in the leeward side because I only weighed about 40 pounds, and I was the bailer. And they'd take it out on these really rough days, and the water would be slopping in, and they're trying to get her up on a plane, and that's important to be lightweight, so they sent me down to bail the water out. And then after that, he got this, the Raven, a beautifully built boat designed by McLear and Harris. She's a bigger boat, 24 feet, and I realized the beginning of my cruising, which is really about going places and exploring, happened in this boat when the Sanford family, once a week or so, would pack up lunch and sail this boat to Great Point, anchor, make some kind of landing. We probably swam ashore, and had a picnic on the beach, and then sailed home in the evening. So my first boat, the first of the 30, was a Rainbow. You can see number 6 there, right in the foreground. My grandmother actually owned it. It was called She Goes. And it was owned, I had to share it with my cousin, but he only raced, and so the other 5 days of the week it was my boat because he didn't care for it. And these boats are, a lot of people, especially you all, know these boats. They're wonderful training boats. They're wonderful boats to fool around with. And, until the America's Cup moved offshore to New Zealand, about 85% of the America Cup sailors from America, in the American boats, were trained in Rainbows. You'd read their biographies, and they all say, started out sailing beetle cats somewhere or other. And I started my cruising here. On my first cruise, I took that Rainbow, and we sailed from the Yacht Club Basin out to a preconceived spot on the horse shed and anchored and ate our sandwiches, went to sleep, and woke up at dawn the next morning. The seagulls woke us up from Code 2, and we realized that our centerboard pennant somehow had come loose, and the centerboard had dropped, and it jammed, and it was low tide. So we were stuck. We were shipwrecked. And actually, I need to go back, and I'm not sure that's going to work with this. But anyway, off one of those old pictures of Nantucket in the harbor was a fiberglass rowboat. And this rowboat's reputed, that was really my number one boat, was reputed to be the first fiberglass boat ever built. It was built by General Electric at Lynn, Massachusetts. And it looked like General Electric built it. I mean, it was very sturdy, but it looked sort of like a light bulb. And so we towed this boat out here because every proper yacht has a dinghy. And so the next morning about 7 o'clock, I rowed it back around Brant Point. Remember, I weighed 40 pounds, and the current was going out. It was quite a row, but I got back home and interrupted my father at his breakfast, and we got rescued. So, cruise to exotic location, discovery, shipwreck, self-sufficiency. I mean, it was all right here. Continuing on with boats here in Nantucket, in the late 50s, we got Flying Dutchmen, and these were very extreme light displacement dinghies. This is taking that off a Fox idea and pushing it as far as it would go. In 1957, over Labor Day, for some reason, 32 people at the Nantucket Yacht Club went on a buying frenzy, and they decided to buy a fleet of Flying Dutchmen. And we instantly became the largest fleet in the world. It's an international class that about a year later became an Olympic class. And they were all in Nantucket. And of course, we didn't have a clue as to how to sail them. But it was very exciting. And they had the Nationals here. And about 8 of those 10 capsizes that James was bragging about were in this boat. And we used to race those on on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then on Wednesdays and Saturdays, we raced the Yankees, which were the big boat, raced outside. It's really the replacement for the Vineyard 18s that I showed you first. And it's been superseded by the IODs. This idea hasn't changed in 100 years. And there were 6 of them in Nantucket, beautifully built wooden boats designed by Starling Burgess. And they represent the other side. These aren't planing boats. They aren't fiberglass boats. So that's the other trend that's going through this story. So we used to take those to Edgartown for the Edgartown Regatta, and the deal would be you pack up some food and you'd get on board and you'd sail over and get to Edgartown and sleep aboard the boats. And you'd race the race and you'd sail home. So that was the beginning of cruising. And I'm going to come back to Nantucket as this place to learn how to sail. I mean, Nantucket is a spectacular cruising ground all in itself. This is Code 2, which I believe originally was called Five-Fingered Point. You can see from this photograph why. Each one of these fingers, each one of these fingers is a harbor, or behind one is a harbor. I mean, you can spend a week just cruising Nantucket Upper Harbor and not duplicate your anchorages. And when you get tired of that, you go out to the west end, and there's Nantucket, Hither Creek, Esther's Island, Eel Point, the lagoon at Tuckernuck, the ponds at Tuckernuck, Muskeget in the distance. I mean, we were really blessed with a cruising world here. So I got started cruising seriously after I got out of college. I got married. My wife and I, we went to Holland, and I'd bought this 32-foot American ocean racer. It was built in Holland. And we were young. I was 21, she was 20. And we set out on this trek across Europe through the canals, which was spectacular. And people couldn't understand what these children were doing. Anyway, we were taking a cruise. This is actually, a cruise I'd been inspired by reading a book in my father's library. And it's really, in a lot of ways, that's, besides being in Nantucket, that's where I learned to cruise and sail in the ocean, was reading all his books in his library in Knoxville, Tennessee. The 10 months that you can't be in Nantucket, you've got to do something. You can't just go to school. So anyway, this cruising is all learning. We're talking about learning how to sail and learning how to cruise. It's a learning process. I didn't realize that the Mediterranean, I'd seen all the travel posters, but it really isn't tropical in the wintertime. And so we did this part of the sail. Yeah, we got to Marseille in December. And so we kept sailing, trying to get further south. And we got as far south as Tunisia and realized that wasn't going to work anymore. And each one of these purple legs, you can see I've got them disjointed there, we started out in calm, we ended up in a gale. So I learned how to sail in rough weather, and it's probably just as well to learn and get it over with. I came back from that trip. I made the only serious mistake in my life. I said, okay, I'm going to go back to architecture school. I'm going to work. I'm going to give up all this childish stuff of sailing around. So that was a serious mistake. And it took a couple of years to sort of get over that. And one of the reasons I did was I knew how to navigate with celestial navigation. And you see, back then, if you couldn't navigate celestially, you really couldn't go out of sight of land. I mean, people did, but you were taking a wild chance. So I've learned how to do celestial navigation, and it's really a wonderful thing, and it's not that hard, except for it's made up of 3 parts. The first part is, I go back, you have to take the sextant and figure out what the altitude of the sun is. And that means you have to be an acrobat. You have to be a ballet dancer because you're holding on and the boat's rocking around this little thing, and your telescope's jiggling around, and you're holding your stopwatch at the same time. So you learn that. And then the next part is you put on your green eye shades and you become an accountant. And you fill out a page of arithmetic and look numbers up in books and all that kind of stuff. And then finally, you have to take that, you have to become a graphic artist. You have to take what you get out of this and plot it on your chart, and that gives you a line of position. You know where you are. So any one of those things somebody can do pretty easily, but not that many people are willing to learn to do all 3. So I became in great demand and started doing deliveries from Nantucket for my friends and other people. A lot of people were doing then was you'd leave New England in the fall and go to the West Indies for the winter. And the trouble was you couldn't leave until November because of the hurricane season. And usually when hurricane season's over, winter has started. So this area, especially in here, always has a gale in it. If you're unlucky picking the weather, you get 2 gales. But anyway, we did it a number of times. And there's my brother's boat, Aspera, the beautiful 56-foot Alden boat that he bought for a song because it was rotten. But she was really pretty and she was really fast. She was really a good sailboat. And she never sank. She had a lucky star. And I won't say what should have happened by all rights, but I got invited to navigate the Queen Mob to Bermuda. She's a beautiful 80-foot Herreshoff schooner. And I had an interesting experience there. We sailed out of Newport. Of course, it's bitter cold, middle of November or later. And everybody's all bundled up and a little bit grumpy. And the next day, you get into the warm water, and the sun came out for a while. All the girls are taking their parkas off, and things are looking much better. And I lay down on the after deck and looked up and I saw a perfect ring around the sun. I said, oh boy. So you guys be happy because in 24 hours it's going to be different. And sure enough, 24 hours later, we're in this quite serious gale in the Gulf Stream, the wind going against the waves going up and down. But this boat, she drew 15 feet of water, and she's 70 feet something on the water line. And it was like being on the steamboat dock in a hurricane. I mean, you had to hold your hat so it didn't blow off, but this thing would just sort of rise and then go down as these giant waves went by. It was quite interesting. We also sailed the Pierra, which I don't have a photograph of, but she's a famous Nantucket boat. She was owned by Randy Gurley. He's a Nantucketer with some boats. And we sailed her to the West Indies three or four times. So to give you an idea what this cruising and ocean sailing is all about, these are some of the things you need to do. And this is a list I have to thank Eric Holt for. Navigator, cook, plumber, jester, philosopher, electrician, storyteller, chambermaid. You get the idea. And so our next trip, and we're doing, this is partly delivery, partly cruising. We're taking Peter Reiner's boat to Europe. This is the first transatlantic I ever did. And I don't know if you all remember Peter Reiner, but he was a Nantucketer with a sailboat. And he had this beautiful attache. He's a 42-foot Sparkman Stevens fat beamy yawl. And we left Nantucket about the 5th of September, just left from the yacht club. And 2 weeks later, we make a landfall on Flores, the first Azore island that you come to. And it's sort of a magical thing. I mean, you just leave the dock and start sailing. We've been out the channel a million times, but then you keep going. We've been around the Great Point quite a few times, but then you keep going. And next thing you know, if you're stubborn enough, you end up in some exotic place like Flores. So as we came around that corner, it's sort of a rainy day, we were actually met by a local boat. They saw us coming. They sent a boat out and pulled us into Santa Cruz. And this is the harbor in Santa Cruz. There are two boats in the harbor at Santa Cruz, as you can see. And the smart ones are up on land. This is a ramp going up here and goes right up into the town. And they take their boats out. And the reason is they webbed us in there. The harbor is really open to the ocean. It's on a shallow spot. And, there's some rocks here. And there were a couple of places where they'd taken cinder blocks and sort of filled in a space between a couple of rocks. But they told us, they said, if the wind comes up out of the east, they said, don't say goodbye, just leave. And so that was the thing there. Anyway, take a slight break. Part of doing all this cruising, you have to be self-sufficient. And I was advantaged because at this stage in my life, I started to become a professional boat builder. And we started here. I'm not going to tell the story tonight, but it's been told in the NHA magazine and other places. We started here in Nantucket building these magnificent Illyrians, which are Herreshoff reproduction. They're not light displacement dinghies, and they're not built out of fiberglass. But we did pioneer cold-molded construction, which is an effort to get the advantages of fiberglass in a wooden boat. A successful effort, I might say. So this is the Magic, which I still sail around. She's in the harbor today. And shortly after that, about 4 years later, I went out to California and started with Rick Wood, Sanford Wood Boatyard. This was a general purpose boatyard. We were basically taking care of boats. We took care of fish boats, we took care of yachts. A couple of years we had the Coast Guard contract. We took care of all the Coast Guard boats. And we built a couple of boats. We built Bernard Matissier's last boat, the Tamata. It's a little 32-foot steel boat. And he being a Frenchman, he likes hard-shine steel boats. And we built the Fancy, which you see here. Fancy was conceived in Nantucket as a Bigelourian, and it was built out at Sanford Wood in San Francisco. And it was owned for a little while by Jimmy Buffett, that's a famous customer. And now it's owned by Jeff Fernie, who's an ex-trustee here, and he's a Nantucketer with some boats. And this is his current boat. I don't know if Jeff's in the audience. He's probably owned 30 boats. And this is John Edwards and Rick Wood also sailed out of Nantucket. They had a boat called the Sea Lion. Rick Wood's the man I started the boatyard with. He's the Wood of Sanford Wood. And they sailed out of Nantucket in 1975 on this big steel ketch. It's 56 feet, North Sea built. After discussing it with Edward Stackpole and Charlie Sales, went down to the Falkland Islands and were actually made the 6th hardway grounding of Cape Horn. And the chart goes off the board there a little bit, but they actually went down in here and came back because they got caught in quite a serious storm in the Drake Passage. But they made it back around and went out. That's how I got to San Francisco, was chasing them. But all the time I'm building boats, I want to go cruising. And so I found the Mary One. And this is interesting. Alpha Fox comes back in the picture. This is an Alpha Fox design, but not a planing dinghy. She's a canoe yawl built in Bombay for an English major during the war at a shipyard right next to the British naval shipyard. I think they stole the teak out of the naval shipyard because the planks are full length. There are no butt blocks in this boat. So it came out of a 40-foot log. Anyway, the major didn't survive the war, and the boat changed hands many times. I found it in Northern Iowa in 1985 and bought it and made a trip down to Brittany with it and learned something about sails, because I bought her just as was, and she had some 30-year-old sails on her. We were sailing across the English Channel. It was light southerlies, and this boat would sail about 60 degrees off the wind, and she'd go about 4 knots. And I'm thinking, well, maybe these old wooden boats, maybe they just don't sail that well. Anyway, our speed made good over the bottom. It was about a knot. It took a long time to get to France. So that winter, I bought a new set of sails, and sure enough, we had exactly the same experience going back to England, except for this time the wind's 5 or 6 knots out of the north. But with a new set of sails, we were pointing 40 degrees off the wind, and we were going 5 knots. Our speed made good was about 3.5 or 4, so we increased our speed 400% with a new set of sails. And I learned the importance of good sails. All the sailmakers here know that. So I was very happy with the Mary One, but I went back home, and that winter, the Impala came into my life. I'd first discovered Impala, or met Impala, when I was 12 years old here in Nantucket. She was brand new, and she sailed in around Brant Point. And I was down on Brant Point with my elders, and we see this gorgeous thing come by. And they say, oh, there's a real gold plater. That's what a real boat from New York looks like, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm this big again and just listening, taking it all in. Well, subsequently, I met her over in Edgartown. This Impala was summer ported in Edgartown for 17 years. We used to race against her at the Edgartown Regatta. And she was the big boat in Nantucket Sound, because in the 50s, a 56-foot boat was a big boat. The beautiful design, she was created by 3 institutions, all of which were in their prime at the time. the CCA rating rule, which had developed a boat that was really good for going to sea, as well as being fast. Sparkman Stevens design firm, which this was about their 10th 40-foot waterline yawl that they'd done. They'd perfected the design. And she was built at Abiking and Rasmussen in Germany, which at the time was at its peak. And so she was sort of a masterpiece representing all three of those institutions. People still built dual-purpose yachts back then. She was designed to win the Bermuda race, but on the same time, and you can't really see it here, but I'll show you some photographs. A beautiful interior, and she was really laid out well for family cruising. There she is at Abiking, about to be launched on the Bremen River. It's a very industrial world there. It was kind of fun. You get an old boat like this. I bought her when she was 32 years old. You get all the stories come with it. And I was sailing around in the Chesapeake about 10 years later with Impala, and I took her in to Cuts and Case in Oxford, Maryland. I don't know if you all know Cuts and Case, but Ed Cuts is an old-time guy there with a beautiful, it could be on the cover of Saturday Evening Post boat shop. And I showed the boat to Ed, and Ed said, "Oh, yeah, I know this boat." She said, "I was in New York. I took her off the ship. I was on the commissioning crew. I worked at Nevinson. 1954, wasn't it?" So there she was. There she is at the New York Yacht Club. She's had quite a history. Said 6 names and 7 or I think I'm the 8th owner. But 2 of us have owned her. The first owner owned her for 17 years, and I've owned her for 32 years. And the middle 6 owners altogether owned her for 16 years. So they couldn't make up their minds. So here she is quickly going from bow to stern. That's the forepeak where the sail is, wrapped up for the winter. That's where the mate lives. There's her galley, their stove and her sink. Over on the other side, it's kind of interesting. There's her mast going right through it. You lean up against that while you cook. And on the other side is her ice box, which I'll tell you some stories about later. There's her main saloon. A lot of really good stories told around that table. Her companionway with her chart table. We still mostly use paper charts. Today the boat's navigated with that little box, which is a GPS. And she has this really wonderful owner's cabin back aft. That's the single bunk that I sleep in when I'm at sea. And there's a double bunk on the other side. And there she is on deck. So these are some of the things that Impala doesn't have. She doesn't have mechanical refrigeration, pressure water, many heads, washing machine. Part of the reason that we're successful and we've got the 80,000 miles is because we don't have this stuff. And I'll give you an example of refrigeration. I'll talk about it just for a minute. Impala has this wonderful big ice box that came with her. If you have mechanical refrigeration, which is the only way to go in the 21st century, the trouble is you have to run your engine twice a day because the thing will get hot in 12 hours. So you have a choice. You can either run it at breakfast over your breakfast coffee and at cocktail time, or if that's uncivilized, you can run it at lunch, then you can get up at midnight and run it again. So instead, we suffer through with, I like ice. I like it in my drinks. It's something luxurious about having lots of ice cubes, which, again, with mechanical refrigeration, you get just a few ice cubes, and you got to keep that engine running or they run out. So the other thing, though, people don't realize is that things like this give you your sea stories. And so we've got, finding ice is really a major thing on Impala. That ice box will keep ice for 10 days to 2 weeks, depending on the sea temperature. So once every week or every 10 days, we go looking for ice. And this is a picture of Christiansø, which is a beautiful Danish island out in the middle of the Baltic. It's way east of Denmark, but the Danes owned it because they kept the Russians and the Swedes in their place by having cannons on this island. And it's got this beautiful harbor and a very quaint town. It's tiny. It's the size of Tuckernuck or smaller. And so I get there, we need some ice. And so I asked the harbor, the dockmaster, where do you get ice? And he said, well, we have a very good ice plant here. The fishing fleet uses it. It's up, it was closer than that big round building there. So I walk up and I find the place. And I say, have you got any ice? And the guy says, we have the best ice. And we've got lots of it. And I said, that's wonderful. I'd like to get some. He says, well, no, you can't. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, you're not a fisherman. I said, no, I didn't say I was a fisherman. I'm a yachtsman. I need some ice. I want 120 kilos. And he said, well, I can't give it to you. And I say, why not again? He says, well, the ice belongs to the fishermen. I said, well, fine, I want to buy it from them. But you can't buy it. It doesn't have a price. I mean, we actually came to an impasse. So we sailed on. We went on to Visby, which is a beautiful medieval Hansa town on the island of Gotland. We've sailed about 100 miles, and now we're offshore of Sweden. And same deal. We still need ice. We've really run out now. It's getting desperate. And so I asked the harbor master, where do you get ice in Visby? He said, I don't know. There's no ice in Visby. I said, well, what do the fishermen use? Well, we don't got no fishermen anymore. The EU saw to that. They're all gone. So we asked around. It turns out that up at the north gate, we're at the south gate of this medieval town, there's McDonald's. And so we go up to the McDonald's, and the McDonald's guy says, look, we got all the ice in the world. We'd love to give you some ice. So we get a taxi cab and our bags and buckets, fill up 120 kilos of ice, all in the taxi cab. It's starting to melt. And so I asked the manager of the McDonald's, how much do I owe you? And he says, I can't take your money. I said, well, come on, you've got to. 100 kilos of ice. I can't just take it for nothing. He said, I can't take your money. I don't have a button for it. So I won't talk about socialists and capitalists, but anyway, we thought about it for a minute. And we realized we could make a donation to Ronald McDonald. He did have a button for that. And so we got our ice, and everything was perfectly happy. So we sailed on, and we went to Stockholm, and we went to Mariehamn in the Åland Islands. We sailed, cruised around the Åland Islands. 2 weeks goes by, and we need some more ice. So we're there at the marina in the Åland Islands in Mariehamn. And I asked the harbor master, the dock master, and he says, oh, yeah, they go to the fishing port. It's about 2 miles down the road, and he showed me where it was. So I went in there, and they said, what are you doing here? Oh, some big trawler had just left. And I said, I need some ice. Have you got any ice? He said, sure. How many tons do you need? I said, a tenth. And he sort of looked at me. And finally he says, well, I tell you what I'll do. You take this chute of mine, and it's a hose that's about 16 inches in diameter, and take it down into your ice box. And I'll turn the machine on, and I'll turn it off just as fast as I can. And I'm like, it's your risk. And I think when I asked him how much I owed him, I think he just laughed at me. But we got our ice. So it's important not to have refrigeration. So there's some other things Impala doesn't have. This has got to do with their sailing gear. No roller furling sails, no electric winches, no anchor windlass, no radar, no electronic charts, because it makes the boat simple and straightforward to sail. I've got the boat set up so that one person can set a sail, take down a sail, reef the mainsail, get the anchor up, come about, one hand plus the helmsman. So you can sail the boat with 2 people. You can do watches with 4. and a very comfortable offshore crew was 5, especially with me being the 5th and not standing watch. And I sleep most of the time. But the reason I can do this is because the gear is simple and it's robust, and people know how to use it, and it's foolproof. And we fool around quite a bit. So here she is, and I've done a bit of racing with her. She's been in 5 Bermuda races, 3 from Newport, 2 from Marion. She's been in a Halifax race. I think I counted up 19 Opera House Cups. But the real thing I do with this boat is cruise with it. And cruising is for traveling. And this is what we've done with her. James already told you, 32 years, 82,000 miles, 500 ports. I've been to 31 countries. And I've had 153 different people on board as, to spend the night, to at least sail enough so they're going overnight. And it's been a wonderful experience. And we've done a bunch of trips up to the Northland, lots of trips to the Bahamas, quite a few trips to Bermuda, often on the way to the Bahamas, once to the West Indies, and then these wonderful trips to Europe. We got all the way up to here in northern Norway, and we came back through England and across here to the West Indies and back. And then a few years ago, we went across again to the Mediterranean, and the boat's now in Greece, where I've been sailing for the last 5 or 6 years. So again, this is almost, well, the thing about cruising, it makes it so pleasant, is that you get this huge sense of accomplishment because you've participated in it. You've actually done something. You think about most traveling, you're sitting in a chair and people are doing things to you. They're flying you across the Atlantic, or they're driving you someplace, or bringing you food, or asking you if you're uncomfortable, or whatever. With a cruising sailboat, you're actually making it all happen. And, I won't go back to all the jobs you do, but you've done all those things. You're navigating, you're cooking, you're sailing. So when you, leave the dock here in Nantucket, this is our 2011 trip with, I think that's Russell Bartlett, Connor Wallace. No, that's Russell. Maybe there's Oliver. That's me. That's who I didn't recognize. And Bill Fredericks, really a good crew. And we're all bundled up because it's May. And we leave Nantucket and sail out the jetties. It's blowing about 35 knots. You'll notice this is May 12th, and it's a Thursday, so the next day is Friday the 13th. We're not leaving on Friday the 13th. So we had to go. And a day later, we're down in the warm water at the meander of the Gulf Stream, and we're swimming. And 25 days after that, there we are in Gibraltar, looking at the ruins of the British Empire. And it's an amazing experience. And every one of those guys has got this incredible accomplishment that they feel good about. So I said, you're watching us having fun. So cruising is about travel, and you go to a bunch of places that haven't been prepped by the tourist industry. And I've just picked out some examples. I mean, here is Petite Newfoundland, which is on the south coast of Newfoundland. It's a little town of about 100 people. There are 30 men and 30 women and about 40 children. There are no roads. This is disconnected from civilization, except for everybody's got a lobster boat, or what we call a lobster boat. It's really a Newfie boat, because they all go fishing. That's how they make their living. And in the wintertime, they use skidoos when the weather's bad, because it's all covered with snow. We got most of the 40 children on board the Impala. And they weren't used to seeing boats like this sail in. And today, Petite is abandoned. This is a picture taken by Bill Page about 4 years ago. He went up there and you can see the chains of his power cruiser. And the Canadian government forced these people to leave because they didn't want to provide emergency services. And so it's gone. But so cruising is about travel, and you go to places like Petites. You also go to some of the cities of the world. There's Gdansk, Poland, with back up. You have to excuse me. I'm trying to press the laser button. There's Impala in front of I think it's a 12th century building with a big crane in it. It's a dock warehouse, and that overhangs like a hay barn in America, but it's got a big block and tackle. It lifts things off ships and puts them in the various. There we are in Copenhagen. That's the old harbor, old port. That's where the cogs used to hang out. There's Gibraltar. You come to these places, these cities, you've read about them all your life, but you come to them by sea, which is the way they were created, really. Now you come in by airplane, and the airport is really irrelevant. And air travel is irrelevant to the city. But the ocean passage is not. In Stockholm, with me grinning in front of their waterfront. Very nice. We sailed into Stockholm after getting the ice in Visby. And it was very nice. We went through some canals and a barge, and it took a while to get in. It's like going to New York and going around all these rivers. And finally, we come to which is sort of the former waterfront. And there were my sister and brother-in-law, Jeanette and George Folks, out in front of the Grand Hotel waving at us. A proper greeting. There we are in Riga, Latvia. So you also see a huge amount of natural beauty when you're sailing around. I mean, this rock wall goes up another 1,500 feet to the top. It's the west coast of Newfoundland. And basically, Newfoundland is a pushed-up plateau. It's about 2,000 feet high, and the only harbors in it are where there are cracks in it or rivers have eroded gorges through it. But all the mountains are exactly 2,000 feet high. Here we are in one of the gorges in Newfoundland. This is Harbour which is on the south coast. You can see we've wormed the Impala in there to an anchorage. You can't really anchor there because the harbor's just made out of, the bottom's just made out of rock. So it's like throwing your anchor on a sidewalk, So, so we tied up to the trees and rocks, which 20 years later we'll do a whole lot of in Europe, but I hadn't learned to do it. This is the first time I'd ever done it. And once you finally get tied up, it's very secure. And there's the view back to Impala into the ocean from the waterfall. Here's some of the other really exotic places we've come to. That's Sanda Island. See this hill going up in the back. Again, it goes up to about there. Sanda is an outpost of the Norwegian archipelago in the west, and it's where the British infiltrated spies into Nazi Norway and Germany during the Second World War. It's all written up in the book, The Shetland Bus. And it was all very peaceful when we were there. Very few people live here anymore. But they did tell us in the wintertime, these mountains cause downdrafts in the winter gales. And it says the wind comes down so hard that it rips the asphalt off the road surface. And there we are. This is taken from a Venetian fort. This is part of the Venetian Empire protecting their route to the Silk Road. This is in northwestern Crete. And, out here, a bunch of reefs that are underwater. You can't see it, but this is a big natural harbor. And it's unusual. The only person that lives on this entire bay, it's about 3 miles in diameter, is this farmer here who looks after the fort for the Parks Department. We had the place all to ourselves. The Norwegian fjord. Fjords make symmetrical mirror pictures. And it's the same fjord we are in the waterfall. And we put the boat right up alongside the rocks. Depth sounder will register 200 feet. And the boat's 3 feet away from the rock. And you put the bumpers out. You don't bump. Anyway, here all the water's pouring down, and it's in trains there. It forces us away from the rocks. So I got as close as I could. And you see Alfie here, and he's taking pictures looking down. Oliver Lafarge. There we are at the Svartsen Glacier, again in Norway. And you just sail right up to it. It's there. This is the Lofoten Islands. Look at those mountains. I call them topsy-turvy. The little fishing village out there, they're still catching quite a few codfish out here, and they've got a viable fishing lifestyle. And when people aren't looking, they catch whales and make sausage out of them. And here's a wreck on Hogstye Reef in the Bahamas, and the sea has made natural beauty out of that by eroding this old iron ship. You can see there the plating is gone. You're looking through the ribs. It's really interesting. This is an atoll in the Atlantic. It's a Pacific atoll in the Caribbean Sea. It comes up from the depths of about 2 miles, and it's a barrier reef around it, 3 or 4 feet deep. And in the center of it, it's this lagoon about 15 feet deep. And the incredible thing about it is it's totally haunted. And you go in and your skin starts to crawl. And you start looking over your shoulder. We were there on a full moon night and made it even more exotic than that. And then you make discoveries cruising. And I'm going to go through this a little bit. This is Johnson Key. It's near the south end of the Jumento Keys, which is a chain which hangs off Long Island, just south of Georgetown, Bahama. And it goes almost all the way to Cuba. The end of it is Ragged Island, which used to be a trading port for the trade from Cuba to Nassau. And that was before Castro, and now really they don't do much of anything. But this Johnson Key we discovered, and it became Impala's island. And it's a beautiful horseshoe cove. Water's about 15 feet deep, sandy bottom. The cove is about 1 mile deep horizontally with a crescent beach at the end. It's all ours. The island's uninhabited. It's got some goats on it, a lot of nesting birds. And there's the rock arms that make that horseshoe. And protected, that's on the windward side, that's what the water looks like. Of course, the big wave there, that's just backwash from the rocks. But you say this is taken the same day as the other picture, so inside it's just a perfect harbor. And over in one corner of it, at the west end of that crescent beach, is what we called the aquarium. And it was a place where the water, for some reason, got warm. And the regular water is about 78, 80 degrees, like the Bahamas. This was about 90 degrees, and it was chock full of fish, including the barracuda there, which we realized is the guardian of the, well, not the guardian, but the security sentry for the reef. They make sure that nobody's fooling around. And there are the kids swimming in here. The barracuda didn't mind them. They obviously looked harmless. So besides these discoveries in this beautiful landscape, I'm going to show you some of just being at sea, the unbelievable beauty of the sea and the sky. These pictures are all taken in the midst of the Atlantic. You really ought to turn all these lights out so you can see them properly, but in my movie wouldn't show it. It's amazing how, everybody thinks of being out in the middle of the ocean and you're in some huge hurricane or something. But often the sea is very, very placid. There's a squall in the Bermuda Triangle. I had one problem. We were sailing to the Dominican Republic, and we had a couple of ladies on board. I won't mention any names, but we got in the trade winds, and there are these little puffy clouds all over the place. And under each cloud is a little bit of wind, because it's generally a downdraft. It changes the direction at sea level. If you're on the windward side, the wind increases 5 knots, and you go by it, and it decreases. And these girls were trying to sail around the clouds. I had to put my foot down. We had 1,400 miles to go. It would have been 3,000. I'd let them have their way. Now look at that. You see the rain squalls there. You wonder what's going on in here. Always a little bit of fear when you're out at sea, because you don't know, everything's going fine, but you don't know what's next. You see things like that, you wonder. Look at that, that's almost a mirror. That's coming into French Wells in the Bahamas. And you not only get this wonderful seascape at sea, but when you come into land, you start seeing things. Here, just a digression, the dolphins. Of course, they're everywhere. And they play with you and show off. And everybody likes them, Dolphins are here, rush up to the bow. Even Sandy goes to the bow, and dolphins are here. There's a lonely Portuguese man of war, 1,000 miles from home, or from land. He's at home. And this is back to the Bahamas. At French Wells, we come into this little place, and there's a flock of pink flamingos. I'd never seen one except for in Florida in plastic. About 500 of them. So, shift gears a little bit. What do you do out there when you're sailing around going to all these places? Here's Connor Wallace. So, one of the things, of course, we do is we sail. And we swim. It's interesting. It took a while to learn how to do it, but you get becalmed, you stop the boat, and you swim, off the boat. And the bottom is like 2 miles down, and you keep looking down. What's down there is going to eat me. But you don't have to worry about bumping your head. We do our washing. We dry our laundry. Groom our hair. That's Bill Fredericks. He came aboard. He was using a neck warmer as a hat. And he just pulled it up so he had hair just like Bart Simpson. I mean, his hair was about that long, and so it was sticking up like this. So he's doing something about it because we're getting in warmer weather. He'd spent the winter in Montana where it was cold enough to live that way. We fix things. We fish. And catch a fish rarely. And we eat. A lot of that going on. And we bake. And we celebrate birthdays. This is Jeanette's birthday at sea, 34 North, 67 West. So the thing that develops on these cruises is camaraderie. And I think it comes from, you've participated, you've made this accomplishment, you've made these discoveries in connection with your shipmates. And so you become strong, you make strong friendships. That's down in Haiti's National Park in the Dominican Republic. Here are just three of us having a good time sailing out Muskegon Channel. That's the day that we left Nantucket. It was so windy. And part of the reason we're happy is we like each other, but also because we're before the wind instead of beating to windward, and the wind's gone down. And there's John Krebs serving us hot hors d'oeuvres at 4 p.m. on the 1988 Bermuda race. And throw the empty bottles in our wake, celebrate the people behind us. And there's the end of the first transatlantic in Arnisch, Germany, celebrating that accomplishment. This is Jarob Keltz, Utz Salmon is a German, me, and Jeremy Potchman. And Justus Halliger, who belongs to Christoph here. Justus was sailing with us this summer. I mean, he's been sailing there. He's 7, I think, and he's now 25, so he's been sailing with us 18 years. There's a Nantucket reunion in Mariehamn with a bunch of my family, Jeanette and George Folks, the Holks. Here's halfway across in the first transatlantic with Jarob Keltz again, Jeremy Potchman, my daughter Chloe, Chris Amory, Angela Abbott, who's not a Nantucketer, but she's from Sandwich. She was a Mass Maritime candidate. Cadet, I mean. The best thing about all this is, for me, is watching the young grow up. So here we are in Nova Scotia. There's Chloe. Right there, she's about 4 now. She's having dinner with her elders. It's Jenny Fraker, who's now Dr. Fraker, and nephew Caleb Clauder. So here are 49 teenagers that have been aboard the Impala for major trips. And some of them have spent a lot of time on the water since then. There's Josh Whitty here. He's my only alumnus who's actually came back from sailing the Impala, bought himself a sailboat, sailed around the world, single-handed. But, not Josh Whitty, Jeremy Potchman's a professional now. Connor Wallace is the captain of Wendy Schmidt Santana. just a lot of interesting people, and a lot of these people have made several trips. And over here, I've got a bunch of off-islanders, of whom Justus is an important one because he keeps coming back. He's been to Forepeak a couple of times. And so here's some of them there are. His daughter, Chloe, at age 5, doing what she does best, which is give me a hard time. Here's my son, Terry, trimming a mizzen. He's about 9 years old there. I think that's nephew Caleb sailing. There's Terry and Josh Lothian in Money Bay, Nova Scotia. There's Terry learning how to run a outboard. Nephew Caleb in the Great Bras-d'Or of Nova Scotia. A good sailboat is a good jungle gym, and these kids get all over it. I think I've got time here. Go back to this guy. Terry went on our first serious sail in Impala, which was a late fall trip, Nantucket to Bermuda. We're going to the West Indies. And typically, we were gale conditions most of the way. He's 8 years old, and a bunch of old guys on board. A little bit bored. So my friend Rick Wood, who's the guy that sailed around Cape Horn, buys him a 600-foot spool of this 1/8-inch sort of flag halyard, the white nylon stuff. So he takes, I don't know where he got the idea, but he decides to, quote, web the boat. So he ties a bowline. He knows how to tie a bowline. He puts it over a hinge pin on one of the doors. And then he weaves the spool and the string down around a knob on a drawer. And then he weaves it over through the window to the galley and around through the galley and back up to the companion. Well, pretty soon, he'd seen Spider-Man, I think. The boat is webbed. And so, we're coming off watch. We're wet. We're cold. And we're crawling through this contraption that this little brat has made. So anyway, there's Caleb. 15 years later, he's a professional musician. He's been entertaining Swedes and Finns in the Åland Islands. There's Chloe again. She's growing up a little bit. Here's the Impala's crew in Matthewtown in 1992. There's Chloe. That's Richard Craddock. I think that's Terry and Nicole Marks. And we're walking along. Matthewtown is in Great Anagua. And so one of the local ladies comes up and accosts me. I was there taking a picture, and she said, "Where's the mother?" Good question. I said, "I'm the mother." And she shook her head, went on her way. Now, there's more crew, Chloe and Lydia Kennedy, a couple years later in the Dominican Republic. Lydia's father was one of the craftsmen that built Hilarions in the early days. There's Chloe growing up. She's in the aquarium back at Johnson Key. This was a few years after we discovered it. There's me and my eldest son, Matthew. This is right before Bermuda race in Newport. And then, starting with Sven Holk, about 1997, I think, I started getting a young man to come on board to help me sail it, so I didn't have to depend on these teenagers, because they're strong and they're nice, but they're unruly, and they're not really totally dependable. And so my first one was Connor Wallace, who came aboard at 16 as an apprentice in Denmark. And the next year, he brought his friend Oliver Lafarge. That's at the Spartan Glacier again. He was 18. Connor lied about his age to get aboard. I told him, I interviewed him at the Downey Flake. This is the old Downey Flake downtown. And I said, well, I like whoever I'm going to take to be at least 18. So Connor says, well, my birthday's in August. I figured that's fair enough. But he meant his 17th birthday was in August. So anyway, he turned out okay. It was all right. There the two of them are. 10 years later, running a boat in Montenegro. Nice breeze of wind. And there's Chloe all grown up in Astapelia, Greece. That was just this summer. And there my sons are all grown up. Again, that was just taken a few weeks ago. So we've come a long way. I mean, there's the Weber of the boat. 600 feet of nylon cord. He used it all, too. And then finally, you have the next generation coming along. And there's Sailor Sanford. She's 3. She likes to steer the boat and crank the winches. But the best thing about cruising of all is coming home to Nantucket. Retracing those steps, sailing back around Great Point. You travel to learn about home. And then you come home and you get to tell your friends all your stories. And that's sort of what I've done tonight. And I thank you for your patience. I think we have a little time if anybody wants to ask a question. Is that correct?
It's getting to be about 20 after 7. Can we maybe keep it to 2 questions and then we'll sign books?
No questions. It's up to you all.
First question. Second question.
What's the highest wind you've been having?
Well, it depends on what you mean by out. Well, one time we were headed from the outer side of Virginia, Cape Charles, Virginia, to the Bahamas. And we get down off Florida somewhere, we're offshore, and they start talking about a hurricane. And it's no problem, the hurricane's 3 or 4 days away. We're 1 day out, or 2 days out. Anyway, we're ahead of the hurricane by a couple of days. Well, the thing about hurricanes is they slow down, they speed up. This one speeded up. So we ended up racing it in, and we came in the Northeast Providence Channel, which is deep water between the Abacos and the rest of the Bahamas, about 2 a.m. And it's starting to blow about 30 to 40 miles an hour, or knots. And we snuck in behind Royal Island using this little handheld GPS. Otherwise, we would have had to go out to sea and just deal with it. And the GPS was cool, except for it wouldn't work down below because it wasn't powerful enough to pick up the signal. And also, it was an early one. It wasn't waterproof. So there I was trying to, and it just had numbers, no charts or anything. So I had it in a sandwich bag and trying to read it with a flashlight through the wet sandwich bag and remember the numbers and plot them on the chart, which was down below. And anyway, we got in behind Royal Island, put the anchors, all the anchors out, and it blew 60 or 70 miles an hour later that night and that morning. But we were in protected water. At sea, we get gales fairly frequently. You get a gale once every 2 weeks. And a gale is 35 knots of wind. But I'm not sure I've ever been in storm force winds at sea. That's 50 knots or more. So, 40, 45. So you see, it's actually get in a hurricane is like being in an airplane crash. I mean, maybe it happens in your lifetime if you're lucky. It never happens. Thank you all.